the Bible to everything. And what can't be quantified, see, is not subject for verification, falsification, for truth claim. So it's very, very important. So the Newtonian, but that material is in the library, untouched, of course, but it's in the library. And I'll give you the Aristotelian viewpoint. See, to be able to trace those changing perimeters of Aristotelian, Newtonian, Einsteinian, would be able to trace the complete shift in thought, what they are. The gravitation in that number 5, gravitation of Newton is not an attraction but an acceleration caused by the only movement possible in a universe, curved motion. That's not self-evident. But the equation still remains its close approximation. So when you read in the Bible that God sits on a circle, that's why you know the earth is round, but the geophysical world, the earth is actually a pear shape. It is not round. It's spherical, but it isn't round.
Doc, is this in your creation evolution syllabus? That real long one you have 50 pages.
It might be in some of the... Now, see, movement is not merely spatial. See, if it is not, then this is the essence. Mechanism cannot explain the universe as a whole. If that is true, the mechanical model of the universe as a total exhaustive explanatory model has had it. And that was the first time in 150 years that creation talk in a scientific arena was a rational enterprise. Neo-orthodoxy uses biblical categories without reference to the real world. Barth's 84 years old when he acknowledged that he needed to have dealt with science, but he would have had to completely rewrote his entire Kirchlich Dogmatik, 6 million words. And then von Rott couldn't be Barthian and all of...
Where did Barth say that? I've looked at that.
Oh, it's in Torrance. No, several. Well, I have all of Torrance's books. I'd have to look. Torrance was the one that went to Germany. And, Torrance has 6 books published by the academic press, Edinburgh. And Torrance and his brother, the two Torrance brothers, were Barthian. And they did more work in the last 10 years of their life than they did in the preceding 50.
Do you agree with Van Houston that said that Barth conjured up neo-orthodoxy because he was afraid of positivism?
Well, Barth was dead set against positivism, but he never answered it. See, it's like existentialism and phenomenology didn't like it either. And as long as you got geniuses, you don't have to answer it. But when you run out of geniuses, you run out of talk.
Well, it just seems odd that a bright person like that shouldn't look at it.
Well, no, this is how serious these matters are. We're talking about hardball, and see, when hardball players don't, and many neo-evangelicals are Barthian today because they think that's the best they've got. That's why we can't get beyond the Enlightenment. The questions of the Enlightenment, I mean. Biblical criticism, inspiration talk, all collapses, see, on this model. No way to talk. If you can't reasonably speak of God's activity in history, you can't speak of Isaiah being inspired, because you get a comparative religion reading of that, like the Greek demons were inspired. The oracles were inspired too. And after Schleiermacher, he buys a scientific model, and inspiration is a quality of the responder, not the quality of the speaker. It is inspiring. The message is not inspired, but it is inspiring. so it turned inspiration into psychology. Oh, you just trace just like that. Just see every move. And Schleiermacher's concept of Gefühl, which is his feeling. Gefühl is New Age. His definition of Gefühl is New Age. Intuitive, direct access to reality. Not through evidence, not through language, not through thought, but Gefühl. Precisely. Schleiermacher's definition of feeling of absolute dependence is perfectly New Age. Intuitive, you sound like a Buddhist. See, to try to crack logic, see, to intuit reality, see, he arrives in nirvana. So this is the feeling, and this isn't, oh, that feels good. This isn't just sensuality, see. This is an intuitive access to ultimate reality.
I was in the nearby bookstore, and they had one of their course books that Gadamer's philosophical hermeneutics.
Yes.
Which is essentially that.
Oh, there isn't any question. See, this is what's wrong. I have a 20-page critique of Gadamer. Needs 100 pages, but see, Gadamer collapses if all these developments collapse. Gadamer is the philosophical hermeneutical source of Bultmann, and Bultmann's a dead horse. It's just how we get the narrative hermeneutics in preaching and Christian education. See, there's no content. We need an epistemological analysis of narrative. See, narrative theology and hermeneutics needs to confront the epistemology of science. Because you can be a narrative specialist without saying anything about the truthfulness of the narrative. Okay, so it's death just to act like that's not there. Anyway, return to just a little while. Get that down. That'll have to cool off. Okay. The Newtonian world machine. Now, the 10 postulates of Newtonian physics are on the chart. Now, the chemical composition, Dalton's atomic theory. The third theme is the nature of chemical reaction. Those three themes. All matters form from chemical elements. All chemical elements, secondly, can be explored and analyzed by quantitative proportions. Third, nature of chemical reaction is explainable by magnetism or electricity, electrical. Therefore, we have the mechanical explanation of how chemistry, physical chemistry, matter at all levels is related. Okay? Dalton, 1766 to 1844, Foundations of Atomic Theory, is the father of a new system of chemical philosophy. 1808 is the birthday of modern atomic theory. Now just run that through restoration dates, 1804 and 1808, 1809, and say now which idea was most important for the shaping of the world. Then Lavoisier, that I mentioned, 1743 to 1794, atomic theory needed distinction between elementary and compound substances. See, some scientific advancement is incremental. Some. But some is paradigmatic shifts. Phlogiston theory and the law of Lavoisier, and the work of George Ernst Stahl, S-T-A-H-L, 1660 to 1734. George Stahl specifically taught that all metal are composed of calyces or metal oxides and combustible material called phlogiston. That is the historic origin of phlogiston theory. If that's too complex for you, read the simple chapter in Butterfield's Christianity and Science. He has a chapter on the phlogiston theory. See, how does matter interact How do the building blocks of reality, microscopic and macroscopic, interact? But don't forget the method was first verified here, extended here, but the building blocks of chemistry will unify these perimeters right here. And Diriyac's equations will do just exactly what Newton's equations did for physics and astronomy. He will order all perimeters of research in the nature of nature. Now, what Stahl did was he thought he explained the phenomenon of oxidation and reduction. Lavoisier's elements, that is, a substance which in fact is not resolved. Proust's law, P-R-O-U-S-T, 1807, he said chemical compounds have a constant composition. Now that's the case. What I wanted to do is just with this point. Chemistry will show the universality, physics will show the universality, and astronomical advancements will show the universality and the universal application of the method. Well, then you're going to study the Bible with that method. You will have the historiographical revolution, the linguistic revolution, hermeneutical revolution, all the revolutions of the 18th and 19th century. They will apply this method to every study, every perimeter of study, and you remove, the best you can do is have God of the gaps. You can have God where we do not yet have full explanatory power. And that progressively leaves him less and less. And it's precisely what Nietzsche meant when he spoke, and thus spoke Zarathustra, about the death of God that reaches Western man's ear in the 60s. But he'd been coming all the whole history of the physical sciences, long before the 60s. Long before the 60s. 60s was just claptrap. Now, atomic theory is over the composition of matter. And there are two broad things that I just want to mention about Proust, Lavoisier, Dalton, and the summation of these. Number one, the atomic theory talked about elastic fluids, that is water, elastic fluids, and liquids and solids. It doesn't sound overly scientific, but given that this is the beginning of the material. Now, are atoms of hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen? What do you think the question is? Are the atoms of oxygen, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen all what? We need it. We need to have your answer. Well, that'd be, no, are they all alike? See, the answer will be yes, they're all alike. If they're all alike, then all matter is studyable, all physical reality, and there is no other reality. God's out, demons are out, all these things are out, supernatural. There is nothing but nature left, and science has an exhaustive explanatory methodology. As a matter of fact, that's false, but there was enormous reason for believing that at the time.
Well, how would they go? I'm sure that somebody confronted that with abstract thought.
No. See, as a matter of fact, they were still trying to answer it with Aristotelianism. See, and this is a very important matter. Or the Bible. You see, the Bible's the Word of God, and this is Satanism. But see, it never dealt either with the Bible or with the nature of science. Yes. And it's only after, see, the Protestants accepted this material in the 19th century, the Catholic Church only in the 20th century. The generation in the context of the Second Vatican Council. And I don't mean that council, they started doing it, but people were moving in the 40s and 50s and 60s.
So you said they accepted that, they didn't try to deal with it.
So they never respond. See, Yaki, a man that we've had here, the student couldn't understand. He was just talking, just a step above elementary. And hadn't any idea that it was life or death with Christian faith. See, because it wasn't life or death with their faith. Of course, their faith wasn't in anything. See, if your faith isn't in anything, then nothing can threaten it. Now,
Did these people address at all the consciousness of the mind? Did they even address that, or were they talking?
now, see, generally, the first generation in the scientific revolution were Christian. The second generation were avowed non. And this raised the problem, what, if anything, is a relationship between science and theology? Do you need theology to do science? No, not after you discover it, you don't. See, a teacher at the university or high school could say, well, what does prayer have to do? This is a physics class or biology class. Well, once you know how to do certain things and get certain results, you certainly don't need to pray to get those results. But that's because the universe is structured. See, and our question is, how did it get that way? See, not whether it's structured or not, but how did it get structured? But if you're just a hard-headed practicing scientist, you don't care how it got that way. You're just dealing with how it is. Well, that bypasses the question that the church never raised in a powerful enough way to ask that question. See, so if God's only relevant on Sunday morning, he's progressively irrelevant. This is where we are at this juncture in the West. Now, just some elementary response. If some particles of water were heavier than others, because some of you have done science, some have not, so I don't want to play games with you. Now, here's what would happen. If some particles of anything, but they talked about water, were heavier than others, then that would affect, the combination would affect the specific gravity. They did specific gravity analysis, and the specific gravity was always what? It was always the same. So, it must mean all the atoms are constantly the same. Now, what is specific gravity? Said it didn't know so much that there was one. Now, compared with a liter of water, the weigh the material in air. How do you weigh the material in air? Then compare this weight with the weight of the same volume of water. That is, gold specific gravity of 19 means any volume of gold is 19 times as heavy as the same volume of water. Highly impractical. The Bobby Joe and Jackie Jean that just want, cowboy songs sung in the church. Now, what's the standard? Well, we have chemistry handbooks and physics handbooks and biology handbooks. See, after all these things are worked out, we're talking about these are just being worked out. See, we don't have them worked out for another 100 years. Now, the standard, then, the density of this still water at 20 degrees centigrade. Now, why would they choose 20 degrees centigrade? Because plus or minus a variable error, that is what? That just becomes the norm. It's arbitrary. Well, I thought science was science. 20 degrees sometimes at 4 degrees centigrade is a standard of comparison, used by science to calculate specific gravity. Well, then you'll get different numbers. Well, I thought science just got the truth. Well, it always has to have a normative instrument of measure, and measurement forever condemns science to being what? Huh? You got it. Fear of measurement. Now, I don't mean that it's precarious. I don't mean that we don't need to take serious attention. But measurement is inseparable in science, and measurement is arbitrary. I.e., it's not necessary. Of course, you could have other measurements, and then the whole physics handbook would have to have all the numbers changed in it. But at any given number, you will have a stable result. You might have a different number if you did it 420, but the stability would be the same. It's not socially constructed. It's only socially constructed in that there's not a revealed number. Now, well, so the structure is the same, it's just what we measure up against. So the specific numbers will not be the same, different norms, but in the system, they will all be what? Same proportion. See, this is what's lost in contemporary science. How did it get lost? Specific gold, specific gravity, and Greek mathematician Archimedes discovered Hiero, king of Syracuse in Sicily. He ordered a new gold crown. Notice how simple and practical. Solid gold. Now, the king suspected the goldsmith had alloyed the crown with silver and kept the gold for himself. Well, he filled the bath overflowing and put the crown in a vessel of water and took the same weight of pure gold to see if the water displacement was the same with the crown and a pound of gold. What did they find? So he hadn't alloyed it because the weight of silver would change the displacement. But again, that's this. The world structure. Silver's not the same weight as gold. Copper's not the same weight as silver. But it's always the same. From an evolutionary interfacing judgment, I don't know how that could happen. Now he took the weight of pure gold and the crown, and the gold would displace exactly the same amount of water. Now, solids, also liquids, have specific gravity. We're on the way to a total mechanical explanation. Total mechanical explanation. That will be the Newtonian, not Newton, but the Newtonian world machine. But it's not just this, it's not just this, it's this. You're getting all kinds of elements. Then the next science will be applying physics to the surface of the earth. Then that'll be a confrontation with geology and physics. See, these parameters will challenge creation. This parameter will challenge the accuracy of the description of the flood and various things. See, different sciences develop to challenge different parameters of what the Bible says. Now, the periodic table of elements. Dmitri Ivanovich Mendeleev, 1834 to 1907, discovered of the elements regularity in their physical and chemical properties were noticed. Now, others had noticed this one or that one, but see, the whole chart. He is the father of the chart. Mendeleev's periodic table was put forward in 1869. Now, see, this will fly in the face of a revolution in biology here to get an evolutionary model. 1869 will be the periodic chart. See, this will give them fits because physics, the laws of physics, know no evolutionary modification, but if evolution, the biological model here, is taken as a cosmological viewpoint, that will run counter to the structure. But see, you couldn't explain biological development without first developing these things. You said, well, my major's biology. I don't care what it is. The history of biology is inseparable from the development of explanatory systems in other scientific parameters. But after you know what the answers are and the questions are, you don't need God, you don't need prayer, and you don't need to read the Bible. Of course you don't. No one ever said you did. But it's this that we want. We don't want to lose sight of what it is. We want them to account for it. See, whether you're doing math. Now, Mendeleev was the professor of general chemistry in the University of St. Petersburg, and it was on the basis of his discovery of the periodic chart that he was appointed head of the... He didn't have a chemistry department before he had chemistry. Realized properties of 63 elements. Then known were functions of their atomic... Now here's the essence of reductionism. That's all these little quips are about reductionism. 63 elements and their functions of their atomic weight so that they could be grouped into distinct families. So two things. There's a consistency in atomic weights, and the atomic weight is how one decides where they go on the periodic chart because they have families of relationships. Now, hydrogen does not interact well with what? Potassium. Now see, but these that are closest, the family units, interact, see, with themselves. But on an evolutionary model, can you figure this out? You see, the periodic chart that you have a copy in the thing, see, they interact with the things close to them. But all of them act according to the same quantitative and qualitative analysis. But they do not all interact. That's very important. Now, from an evolutionary standpoint, now notice simple to complex. It just sounds so simple. But the point is, you don't have any evidence that that's how it was. Other than that, it's perfectly wonderful. See, we have actually in the periodic chart both simple and complex. We don't have from simple to complex. And there is no physical or physical-chemical reason to believe that the most complex, unstable element on the periodic chart was evolved from what? Well, you don't want evidence to stand in the way of a paradigm. See, Christianity doesn't need to get it. And Christianity doesn't need to be reduced to sociology and psychology. It's about the universe. It's about God. It's about the origin of the whole, every system of the universe. See, what excitement, sheer joy could be the church if they didn't think it was some dumb preacher making idiotic remarks on Sunday morning. It's about God. And then maybe we could recover praise to this God. And then no one that wouldn't need to be institutionalized would ever say, but I don't get anything out of worship service. See, it gets to be absurd. They must come to worship something other than this God. Surely something's gone awry that the practical ministry can't fix up. Because you've got to get the God back that creates awe and not awe. Well, a second thing, Mendeleev, valency. Valer, to have power. Now, in high school chemistry, or grade school chemistry now, we talk about valence. V-A-L-E-N-C-Y, from Latin verb valere, to have power. Now, what's that mean? Power to combine. But some things combine loosely, and some things combine to make something else. See, these are characteristics of the building blocks of reality. Now, the degree of combining power of an element as shown by a number of atomic weight of hydrogen, chlorine, and sodium. Mendeleev demonstrated that. Most remarkable of the periodic chart was the realization that the discovery of the elements was incomplete. How would he know that? Empirically, he had no way of knowing it, except he knew that there was a lot of holes in the chart. On the basis that the universe is ordered, he predicted what ought to be there. But if reality is just socially constructed, like the developments from Kant's epistemology to Hegel to the sociology of knowledge thesis, you see what happens with that? See, some things are socially constructed, but most things aren't.
If it was evolutionary, it still would go.
Oh, correct. If it were evolutionary, he wouldn't have any idea whether it ought to be there or not. He didn't know that it ought to be there. He only assumed it ought to be there if the universe is ordered. But he didn't know that. It's a difference between assume. See, it made perfectly good sense from certain assumptions. And that it had predictive power demonstrated that the assumption was correct. But you can have all kinds of assumptions that you can't verify or falsify. Some people think that if some position can't be falsified, that is proof that it's true. That isn't proof that it's true at all. It's only proof that it probably isn't about anything. It isn't subject to confirmation or falsification. The periodic chart, that it wasn't complete. There are gaps of undiscovered elements within the table. Lighter and heavier, uranium, heavier than known, the heaviest known. Now what's going to happen, but we won't do the chart anymore, is what? We're going to get into the bottom of the 19th and 20th century, we're going to get something that matter does, on to another paradigm shift. What? Well, we'll do that. We'll say a little bit about that next time. it changes, but in normal, natural habitat, it won't. That's hardly a paradigm for supporting, huh?
Eternal matter. Evolution.
That's right. See, we're not trying to defend J.W. McGarvey's dumb remarks about everything. We're trying to say, God, is this book the truth? Are we in as much trouble as some people want us to think we're in? Well, God didn't get us into trouble, so I suppose that's why He's leaving us just stewing around in our own juices. Now, emergence, let me give you a source book. The Harvard source books on physics and all these are expensive books. Everything that's useful is expensive. Leicester and Klockenstein, the source book in chemistry, Harvard. And the Harvard University Press has all the source books. Greek science, medieval science. Grant, a man that I studied with in Indiana, had a PhD from the University of Wisconsin. The man was head of the Department of Wisconsin, went to Princeton Institute of Advanced Studies. And but the source book on chemistry, there's source books on the tools. See? Source books on all the sciences. And these are the documents, you see, that unfold the discipline. And those are quite heavy. And you can use those for doorstops, see, because they're heavy books. They're not see-through. They're not wide margin, you know, large print for the blind and the near blind. After you read it, you're blind. Now, emergence of organic chemistry. Now, organic chemistry unfolds only after certain other things have happened that gave them clues that certain things ought to be, what? Ought to be the case. See, we're after this method, universality, and it's after this, the nature of matter. So if everything that's real is reducible to some building block of the periodic chart, what happens to the Christian faith? Well, it's a myth. It does exist, but many things exist. Diarrhea exists, and leprosy exists, but many things exist that are deadly.
Would assume then that things like the supernatural cannot be testable and therefore
Yeah.
cannot be true.
Now, so they will be adjudged after comparative religion develops in the midst of all this, that we really get these weird supernatural viewpoints.
So resurrection, miracle, walking
Oh,
on water.
see, you don't need to worry about a specific miracle. You need to worry about miracle. Because a specific miracle is over historical evidence, and you apply this model of doing science to history, and you will remove it from history. That's what the textbooks, even useful textbooks in apologetics, don't seem to realize there's been a historiographical revolution as well as these other revolutions.
But many of those fellows were trying to salvage the church and the Bible rather than really criticize the Bible. Because the science had already done it in, they were trying to salvage it.
See, this book represents the consequences of 150 years. This is not just another book. It is another book, technically. But it is more than that because it represents the consequences of all the development of the sciences that never existed prior to the 19th century in the world. And each one of them, in their own way, gave a lie to something that was in the biblical affirmation. So that's why it's still a very important. Two things, and then we'll just pack and load and go home. Organic chemistry, and Euler, let me spell his name, O umlaut H-L-E-R. He was the first to artificially produce urine in the laboratory. Urine in the laboratory. But that couldn't have been done had he not known what? Of urine. See, he had to know it before he could replicate it. Now then, in this context, organic chemistry, qualitative analysis had developed. Electromagnetic synthesis had been accomplished. That was necessary, and we're on the way to heat, light, and magnetism will develop, and these, in their own way, will do this. Will address the nature of matter. The nature of matter. This, and then we'll go home. Put this down, and I'll give you this chart next time. Here's where we come in the 20th century, matter and objectivity. See, if all matter is microscopic in nature, and all observation is theory-based, then there's no such thing as an objective or merely objective. I didn't say social construction. These are the problems. These 8 problems are the scientific philosophical problems dealing with nature, with matter in the 20th century physics. Matter and reductionism. See, if everything that's real, that's an ontology, equals some form of the building blocks of the periodic chart, if all that's real is made up of material brickbats, then this is reductionism. This is one of the lethal enemies of Christianity. Then man is nothing but. A rose is nothing but. Sound is nothing but. Music is nothing but waves. The physics of sound. So then aesthetics is gone. Morals are gone. You hear the Oxford and Cambridge linguistic analysis tradition wiping these things out. God talk is out. All over science. Matter and complexity. Now matter gets more and more and more simple or complex. As a matter of fact, complex. We're not done with these, but you put them down. Matter and substratum. Now the Greeks started out with a view that all reality was invisible and indivisible, and it had a substratum. Well, that was because they sought this. But the substratum, the real issue is whether, see, if Einstein's equate energy equals ml squared, well, energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. What's that mean? Then light is equal to energy. And matter is reducible to the ultimate nature of matter is not matter. That table will be on reserve. Hansen's table. Immateriality of matter. And only a hard-headed positivist would talk like it is. But they're also not the ones creating advances in microscopic physics. Who aren't? Hard-headed positivists.
I guess that makes sense, but I ask the question, the forces have to be holding something together.
Yeah, no, see, that's exactly what is it that holds together. And it isn't, this is why contemporary hardball theoretical physicists talk about symmetry rather than causality. Because you can describe the interrelationship, but one cannot see nor study causality. See, with Einstein's equations, that is the end of a total exhaustive explanation of the universe on a mechanical model, which means the death of certain theories of causality. Okay? Okay. So they don't talk about causality, they talk about symmetry, but that's interfacing. And then matter and conservation, that's over thermodynamics. See, the nuclear chemists deal with the atomic structure, the outer ring. See, it's the nuclei that are exploded to get the energy. You see, the weapons fired in Hiroshima and Nagasaki are trigger mechanisms. Huh? These are used to trigger. See, this decade, or very soon if Jesus tarries, our energy will be in hydrogen. Okay? But not matter and space. Well, what's that got to do with it? What holds matter together? Then we give a scientific explanation of the composition of that chair, but that doesn't account for what? What is the stability of its chairness? You can give scientific explanation to human beings and say, well, that does that in. Then a cadaver is the same thing as a living person. Well, then quit crying. Quit having a funeral. Just give me the money. Matter and mass, now it runs like that. Matter is reduced to mass because mass is not just equal to weight. Because mass in different circumstances, now we're all done because it's time to go home. We get all that unpacked, we do some light talk, and light doesn't need a medium. See, all matter needs medium to function in. Light is the only known element that does not need a medium. That's why light can be transmitted through the vacuum between the stars, the solar system, and the earth. Light doesn't require a medium. It is its own medium. Well, what does light travel through? Nothing. Every known element would not travel in a vacuum. Except what? Would radio waves, would magnetism feed light? You'd run out of heat if the universe is infinite in size. You'd run out of energy. So all these things are building up. It's all about a Christian viewpoint of why the universe is reasonable. Matter and individuation. Now notice what happens. You apply the concept of matter to psychology and sociology and you lose the person. Because all you're describing is the chemical composition. So the uniqueness of a human being, the imago Dei, that makes no sense at all to a hard-headed scientist. Why? Because he's built up on a theory of what matter is, and if that's all we are, then certainly there is no way. And the odd thing, paradoxically, people talk about their dignity, and on this model, do you ever talk about an atomic dignity?
So it leads to despair and he turns a new way.
Now, but the trick is, one doesn't talk, he said, I have 2 atoms at home that are in despair. See, to figure out why there's a crisis in the human psyche if man is nothing more than this. See, there is no existential explanation why we don't talk, I don't think we talk about rocks suffering or nucleic acid suffering a lot. Why do we talk? Well, it's just reductionism. See, these are the 8 themes, and I'll try to give you some information about these right here. These 8 themes. This is a paradigm shift, so the talk next time will be on these 8 points. Because after Newton, after the method from Galileo to Newton, the constant search for this, the build-up of these disciplines, and then after next week we'll go to geology and Genesis, but that will be the particular application of a method to one particular perimeter of the world. And if you can, just come back. See, it's life or death for the Christian reading. It's desperate. I don't mean Christian reading is desperate, but leadership must understand that the most powerful single thing devised by the mind of man is the scientific enterprise. And no faith in God as the origin of the universe ought to survive that cannot give explanatory power to this most powerful instrument. And then secondly, New Age gives the lie to all of that. So we have 2 large problems. One is the power of science that we must affirm, because if it's from God, then that's not a threat. Why would anyone think that information about a world that God created should threaten the faith? So don't study, don't read books, just the Bible, because you'll lose your faith. Well, you don't lose your faith in the creed of the universe from reading. You lose your faith from not thinking about what you're reading. See, there's 2 ways to avoid thinking. One is to believe everything, and the other is to doubt everything. Either horn of the dilemma does not require thinking. But thinking will intersect this. If God created our capacities to think, is it Is it this late at night? Is it unreasonable to assume that he would want us to use it? Does that sound unreasonable to you? See, it's not what we think, it's how we think and what conclusions we reach by thinking. It's not overthinking at all versus revelation or versus this. Does that make any kind of sense? See, the scientific revolution. Now, next week we start on our reports. So, report businesses from Kuhn, and then these eight themes from classical physics, these 8 themes in contemporary physics. So, be what we'll wrestle with, and then go jump immediately past that and assume the universal validity of the laws of physics, and it will be applied to geology. But all those extrapolation things, whether about the age of the stars or the age of rocks, will be based on certain assumptions that develop over the nature of light. Yes. Okay. Let's pray. John, you haven't prayed all day, have you? Well, let's not end this day without you praying then. Get your soul cleansed. You pray for us.
Father, we thank you so much for the opportunity we do have to study. Father, I thank you for Dr. Strauss, his ability and his sharing with us. Father, I thank you that you have given us minds to think. Lord, I pray that we would use them, that we would be able to give the answers to the world, show them that no way that science disproves them. It only shows that your power and your glory. It shows